We are good at this. All right. Do you want to take that again, or should I just go?
I honestly think we should do it again from the top.
As you wish.
All right, here we go.
I'll actually fix it.
No, it's okay. We're all this. This is all just going to be cold open. Here we go. All right. You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries. This is a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about the recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss using miniatures with Shadowdark. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. How you doing?
I'm all right. I've got the weirdest sense of deja vu right now. I don't know what it is. Like, I just feel like I've experienced this before.
Yeah,
something.
Yeah. Well, today's episode focuses on our love of using miniatures with Shadowdark. So, Jody, why don't you take us to the table?
I will, but I'm going to segue first, a little off ramp, and then we'll get back on. It's kind of like when you need to take a text, but you're driving down the highway.
Yeah, I hope you got notes on this.
I do. Where does this episode come from? Matt, in our last episode, you were talking about this epic mass battle siege of Prigwort and using, the Hell March rules and having a bunch of miniatures on the table. And I was all juiced up, and I got to kick in some models on that. And, I was excited about that painting process. And then my session the weekend before that you were missed dearly at the table, but we pressed on, and they fought a roper, and there was like people drowning in a river, and the roper was yanking people across the river, and that was awesome. And I painted this roper up like months and months and months ago. I was totally stoked with how it turned out. And then a long time ago, we had that session where one of my characters died because they got nuked by an ally with a lightning bolt from across the room, and that sucked, but was also awesome. And the miniatures were like right there for the whole thing. And then I was thinking about this old scenario where the heroes came down the stairs and there was like this dungeon and these like cages, and this giant beast was pacing back and forth, and they had to run and like slide under the monster to go through the door, and they just made it through the other side, and the torch went out. It was this crazy moment. And all of these things happened with little toy soldiers on the table being awesome all the way through it. And I was
remember that time that one really cool thing happened when we were playing? That was cool.
It was, and it wasn't prevented by having little toy soldiers on the table.
All right, Jody, let us gather round the fire. Hopefully our miniatures aren't on fire like that guy who got angry at Games Workshop.
Legend. What a legend. I think people are doing that as art now.
I think so. It's going to become a parody of itself. All right, so let's talk about miniatures. So immediately off the top of the show, Jody, I need you to respond to all the people who are wringing their hands, gnashing their teeth, who are there with pencil and paper only, or maybe even just their computers in front of them, saying, no, Theater of the mind. We play these games of imagination using just our imagination. Jody, what is your response to those people? I assume what we're going to hear is a long diatribe about how miniatures are the one true way, and there is but only one way to play role-playing games. So I look forward to you receiving lots of hate mail, and direct messages, because you have completely and utterly alienated part of... I can't go on. Go ahead.
Well, it's true. I mean, the history of the game is tied to wargaming and chainmail in the early 70s with Gary Gygax in his... I don't care about any of that, actually. I mean, great, I do care about the history and lineage, but that's for a different episode. If you like to play Theater of the Mind, and that's how you roll, or Theater of the Zoom call on Discord, screen,
oh boy,
Instagram... Computers like go on the internet, right? Anyway,
Jody, you've got it. You have to stop this whole charade about you not being able to use computers. Okay, we'll talk about the fact that you sound literally like the oldest person I've ever met in my entire life.
That's the goal.
All right.
So the actual why of I can't deride, and I have no interest in deriding anybody else's style of play. And there are styles of games, not necessarily Shadowdark, but it could be. There are style of games that I think are just better without miniatures. We talked a little while back about playing kids on bikes. It would have been very weird to have miniatures involved in that game.
Yeah.
It just would have felt strange. That said, we've played some Shadowdark games where we could have gone Theater of the Mind, and we've played Mothership games where I desperately wished we had miniatures involved.
Yeah.
So it isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There's not there's a right way or a wrong way to do this. For me, and I think for you, the right way to do it is because, doggone it, I just love those little pieces of metal, plastic, or resin, and the imagination space and the way they allow me to express creativity. And sometimes, and in some of the examples I picked in particular, they really help convey the story in a way that Theater of the Mind does struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's for me is always the juice. Are there times when Theater of the Mind's better? Yep. Is there a time when using miniatures is better? Yep.
So, okay, let's start with from the sort of capital T truth that there's no wrong way to do this hobby, especially when we're talking about how we imagine. But we are going to talk about miniatures today, and both you and I think for many of the same, but some different reasons, enjoy using miniatures at the table. There are some practical reasons for that. There's also just some, I like to call it my childlike sense of wonder that just can't give up playing with toys. And I think you share that.
Amen.
And then I think we also, each of us use them in slightly different ways and have changed the way we use them in RPGs over our kind of most recent stint, returning to role-playing games. So I want to start with, for you, what do you feel like miniatures bring to the table? I open-ended, you kind of already answered this, but I want to, let's get down, maybe you can use some of the examples. Let's get down to brass tacks here. Give me your argument for using miniatures, and you can take this in whatever direction you want to go.
I'm going to give you two short and tight answers. One of them I think is pretty quantifiably true, and the other one's pretty subjective. I'm going to start with the subjective because that's the weaker argument, and that's what I tell my students to do. The subjective is a sense of spectacle. If you enjoy playing with miniatures and you enjoy having dungeon terrain or a town terrain or an wilderness map, whatever it may be, and you enjoy that spectacle of seeing the models on the table and creating a scene, there is a ton of power in that shared imagination space and creating that spectacle. Something you've adopted that I try to adopt, I'm a little less successful, is if you have time, you will set up a whole table scene in our game space for our Dolmenwood games, and the group comes in and immediately there's curiosity about it's the fire we gather around to tell our story. Is this tableau of models. We've had games where that tableau never got used. It wasn't relevant because the party was like, nope, I am wandering off to the lake. And you're like, well, I didn't build a lake, so here we go.
Yeah.
So that's the little bit more subjective is they do create a spectacle. It's something we talked about with the Battle for Prigwort episode, is having that whole town set up and everything. Damn, that looked cool. That was fun. We also have a player to that point of spectacle, and this is the bridge to the more objective truth, I feel that is said, she doesn't remember a whole lot of what we do at the table unless there are models put out. The physical, tangible representation of things locks it into her memory. Beyond that, from an objective sense, and I mentioned that my character getting iced by a lightning bolt from across the room, the distances and the lines of sight, and this is the tried and true argument for using miniatures or physical space representation, that I have markers that are accurately placed to position relative to one another and distances. My model had moved directly opposite our wizard. She was distracted on her turn, thinking about spells and turns and wizardy deep thoughts, of course. She let loose with her lightning bolt. My model was clearly in the way. We resolved it. And while everybody was like, oh, damn, yeah, that's where the stuff was. There was no argument about like, well, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have done that. And having played in games that are theater of the mind, oh, no, I didn't imagine it that way. And in any amount of fidelity, there's take backs. And you're like, oh, okay, well, you didn't see it. No, that's what I described. No, but that's what I said. And no, my character died to friendly fire and there was no take backs. There was no, well, I wouldn't have done that. There was no,
right.
It just went down like that because there was nothing to argue. The pieces are set on the board and that's it. So that objective piece of relative space and measurement is just more precise with models. And when I say models, you could be using tokens and pencils and the dungeon pizza or whatever Professor DM calls his spinny thing. Ultimate dungeon terrain.
The ultimate dungeon terrain. Exactly.
Which you and I have both tried. I think both of us are lukewarm on it, but it's another style of this that takes that ambiguity out. It tries to kind of split the difference, I think, between the two. But I digress. That's my two, is the spectacle and then the benefits of quantifiable measurement are very real.
Yeah, so I agree with both of those. The only thing I would add in terms of like reasons in the positive, right? So reasons to play using miniatures. And I actually want to break down because you and I, well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but you and I specifically use miniatures, but there's lots of different ways you can represent stuff and lots of different methods that range from lo-fi to hi-fi, etc. But I think the only thing I would add to your list as a reason to consider playing with miniatures of some kind is that for me, they take an enormous load off of me having to consistently and repetitively describe the imagined space. So as a GM, especially if we're in combat, at least one of the things that I have learned and the things that I've picked up from folks who play Theater of the Mind quite a bit is at the beginning of each player's turn, you kind of re-describe the battlefield and the circumstances. And, you know, for folks who do that regularly, that's great. But what I have found is that there are just some games where that is harder to do. So Shadowdark is in the lineage of Dungeons and Dragons, and there's some amount of spatial requirements and some amount of tactics, depending on how granular you're going to get specifically with your distances and things like that. But you need to know where things are in relationship to your character, your party, etc. Those things are important. Whereas in other games where those things are either more abstracted or just of lesser importance, you mentioned Kids on Bikes. Like in Kids on Bikes, it is not super important to know where your character is in relationship to another character in a particular scene. We can all just kind of imagine them differently, and that's not going to lead to an adverse outcome or an outcome where people, I think, are, you know, it's just less likely. So for me, that's the only thing I would add is that this goes along with your objective thing, but it takes a load off the GM. It takes the onus off the GM to consistently describe the imagined space and get player buy-in on that. And that's just an extension of that, like objective reality being represented on the board. But I want to dig down into the practical side of this before we go into the more kind of maybe philosophical. So as far as miniatures are concerned, both you and I enjoy like the kind of the highest of hi-fi situations that we can both afford and also convince our significant others to allow us to store.
Yeah, both of us have a significant portion of our garages are dedicated to storage of this stuff.
And I so we will get to the negatives, which this is definitely one of them, or not a negative, but a serious concern. But I want to talk about like how you use miniatures, like what kinds of miniatures you like, why you like them, what you think they bring to the game. And then we can talk about like other alternatives that maybe you've used or that I've used. But like walk me through if you're setting up a scene, what is your ideal scenario? Are you like 1-to-1? You want the environment, you want the distances, you want the miniatures to look exactly like what, like, is that what you're going for? Or is there a slider there? What's the deal?
That's a great and heartbreaking question for me.
I know. That's why I asked it.
You came in hot with that. You know me too well, my friend. In a perfect world, yeah, I would have 1-to-1 perfect representation. If I could, I would. Why can't I? I have a 3D resin printer. I go hard into the geek. I have a very, very accommodating partner who benefits and enjoys this stuff. Who
famously would not play. I mean, I don't want to paint her in a bad light. This was said mostly.
She painted herself in a bad light,
but famously did tell you that she was not going to play a particular board game until the miniatures for that game were painted. She would have definitely played had you really wanted to, but it was a very. Maybe not. I don't know.
No, you're giving her a lot of credit there.
I'm trying to give her credit. But
I'll throw her under the bus since she's can't leave me. For those who know, the first edition of Massive Darkness famously came with a couple hundred miniatures, like 100+ miniatures. And she was like, well, I can't wait to play it once it's painted. And I was like, well, I think I'd like to try it before it's painted. And that seems like kind of an unreasonable ask, babe. And she's like, oh, I have faith in you. You'll get them done eventually. And walked away. So yeah, legitimately won't play board games if I haven't figured out some way to get paint on them. Victim of my own success there. Tangents are great. The thing about the 1-to-1 is not viable because of a couple things. Cost is real. Like if you are sitting here going like, oh man, the cost is prohibitive, or storage or space. Yes, it is. I have been a miniature hobbyist for, I don't even like to think about it, a long time, 30 years plus, we'll say. And the plus is getting pretty big. So I just love it as a hobby itself. The arts and crafts part of it is very real for me. There is a transitional element that is very real, and you cannot avoid this. If you put down models, they take time to set up. Setting things up 1-to-1 takes a lot of time. So there is a sweet spot that I aim for of enough to get the vibe across and hopefully inspire inquiry, right? That would be the perfect scenario. Would be I've set down models and my players are now asking questions about what's not there. Feels like some sort of very Eastern art philosophy or something, but
the negative space.
Yes. What lies between and beyond the walls? That's sort of the sweet spot for me these days is, can I get enough that the physical ground and the vibe of what's there is accurate and we have a grid to work from? A little embellishment, a little flair, because I got to be me. But 1-to-1 is a level of tedium that, and also prep work that is just not sustainable. So
yeah,
that's mine. Are you at the same spot? Because you ping pong. I feel like you waffle a bit.
I do. And I'll tell you why. Because and maybe I said we were going to kind of start in one place. I think we're just going to kind of abandon that and just. We're gonna go
strange sense of deja vu again.
I know. So I waffle because I have an internal struggle. I love miniatures. I feel very deeply the sense of like transition between scenes and when I'm going to use miniatures takes time. That time is valuable. I don't want to waste people's time. More so, what I have found is that if you get too close to 1-to-1, you have the problem that some battle maps actually have when you're playing online, which is that the only thing that's real is the stuff that's on the table, and players don't ask questions about what other stuff might be in the room. And that basically eliminating inquisitiveness really bothers me.
Uh-huh.
The other reason is that when you're playing in a setting like Dolmenwood, it is literally impossible to find miniatures for some of the the monsters and denizens of the wood.
The Mossling ancestry.
Literally, one of the PC ancestries is non-existent in both physical miniatures that you can purchase and 3D printable files.
Yeah, moss dwarves are not, and they're not really moss dwarves anymore. They're fungal people, but not they're their own thing.
Right.
And they're cool. Bat little dudes woodgrew are very difficult to find. I had to do some hacking and slashing to make ours.
So in that way, you're limited to, I mean, in a lot of ways, you're limited to like specific settings. And so that's the other reason.
Right.
The third reason is that I waffle between trying to get to 1-to-1 and then being more austere. Is when you are in 1-to-1, there's also a sense of tactics and specificity of ranges. We've talked about this a lot in terms of spell casting, but like Shadowdark just like doesn't use 30-foot increments. You can, and you can quantify all this stuff. I don't like that. I don't want to do that. I'm done with that. That's not my vibe anymore. And I'm trying to move away from it to accommodate the kind of game that I want to run, which is a little bit looser on movement and ranges and hopefully a little faster. And so when things are more austere, it gives a sense of possibility and it loosens the grip that players have on the scene. And to end all this, the thing I like about miniatures though is that they offer a sense of space. And like you said, they lock things into especially one of our players' minds. And it's something that I think about a lot, that like there are lots of people, or I don't want to say lots, but there are more people than I think a lot of us maybe who don't have a hard time imagining something in our head and imagining a space and playing in theater of the mind. There are just folks who that just flat out does not work for and who need a spatial representation. So I like providing at least a loose space for people to imagine in. So I don't know. I waffle because of time. I waffle because of granularity and suspension of disbelief. And I also waffle because I know that sometimes I need a scene to be represented, but I don't have the miniatures. I don't know where they are. You guys have done something completely bananas, and I play in a sandbox mode. And this is, I think, what I wanted to pass back to you was, do you think that your love of miniatures and your desire to use them it plays a role in you being a module first DM?
100%. It is a 1-to-1 connection. They are not removable from one another. If I were a Theater of the Mind GM, I would be much more inclined to sandbox because anything that comes up, this is going to sound flippant, but just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what comes up because I can just adjust and I can whim and, but what if this fight's unfair? Well, I can just fudge what I was describing. I can just, and that's a dangerously slippery slope on my part of saying that Theater of the Mind GMs are fudging all of their...
Right.
And that's not my intention. There is something to those boundaries that allows my creativity to thrive, of the boundary of a module, and then where can I bend and flex? The boundaries of a module of what models do I need to run this? I have the luxury of having a sizable collection, so it's fun when I bump into something. I'm running Forge of Fury right now. I didn't have Dwaragar, so I had to go dig up Dwaragar and find models to use for them. And that's been a fun challenge to go, what do I have in my collection that will proxy for this space and get the vibe across, but are not necessarily 1-to-1.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that is as a prep and set planner or module runner, there's a lot of joy I take in the prep process of knowing what the next module I'm going to run is and thinking myself up a painting list and thinking myself up a model list. And what do I need to add to my collection? It's a need. It's deep.
Capital N on that.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, the entire thing, capitalize all the letters.
I will say the next 2 modules that are available kind of as immediate adventure paths, I have already started the process of curating the models for in some cases months and months and months ago.
Yeah.
And in some cases it's just early planning for like, okay, well, if the party goes this way, because there is a sandbox element, a points of light and branching story arc.
Sure.
It's not true sandbox of you can go anywhere the hell you want, just because I need a little bit of lead time. But yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a totally fair one for the style of game somebody's going to run. You know, what's weird. I'm going to back up here. We're just going to continue to be very scattershot in this conversation apparently today.
That's fine. I mean, you know,
neither of us likes drawing on a map.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go run with this.
Really random. And but it does go back to the quantifiable space of, so if I had little tokens, I actually really think it's cool when people take like a picture online and put down the glass dome on top of it. I think that's rad. Make monster tokens like that. And when I see that on a like hand drawn, you know, you'd use the Sharpie dry erase, whatever expo marker on the pre-printed hex grid map, and you draw it in and then they move around and you work out. I think that stuff's fun. I played for a GM for years that ran that way and it was great. We had a blast. And it's weird how much I find it. I hate every time I have to do that because the room is so big that laying out tiles is not viable. And I've noticed actually until we had this conversation, I noticed you initially were doing that and you've moved away from it also.
I have.
I know why for me I don't like it. I'm curious if what for you changed that of again, it's rad when people do it. For me, it's weirdly this like, I don't like doing that.
So for me, it's twofold. Number one, I don't have to, right? So there's a luxury and a privilege in just not necessarily needing to, especially in many spaces that we're in the game that I'm running. We aren't in proper dungeons with the regularity that maybe, you know, the most kind of quote unquote mainstream Shadowdark games might be. However, when I was running Barrow Maze, I would draw a lot, primarily because I had to be super quick on my feet. And actually this is a nice dovetail to another thing I wanted to make sure that we touched on, because you actually mentioned something about this to me the other day. What I have started doing is I have only really started using miniatures when there's a combat. So, and when I say started, this is always how I've kind of tried to GM, but I have waffled a little bit, doing more 1-to-1 and actually like building out the entire dungeon and sections and stuff. When I was running Barrow Maze and I would draw, what I noticed was the fidelity of I don't know how to explain this without it sounding reasonably pretentious, but like there's a clash between a drawing on a mat and models and the way that things look on the table. And I actually think that for me, as an aesthetic thing, which again feels very, the whole thing is about aesthetics though, I guess, so whatever, but as an aesthetic thing, I just prefer there to be, if I have painted miniatures, I prefer there to be painted terrain. And I don't know how to say it without sounding like a pretentious ass.
I think to get to some nuts and bolts kind of stuff, I do see a lot of conversations online about, hey, how do I use miniatures for this and that? You mentioned movement earlier and wanting to move away from rigid movement. Shadowdark has its movement rules. They're relatively clear. Why did I think of
that? That's the other reason I don't like drawing on the grid, is because it has a grid.
And I think both you and I have found it becomes, as you said, if the fidelity of the representation is too high, then that is all that exists.
Well, Jody, I'm going to cut in here because this is important. The reason I don't like drawing on a grid is because the thing that ends up being the most visible is the grid. Like you're literally drawing on a grid and you are literally highlighting lines on a grid, and so the grid becomes important. And I don't like that. I like terrain that doesn't highlight the grid. Okay.
So how do we fight that?
God. Thank you for I knew I was missing something. I really appreciate that.
So how do we fight that? Very tangible, small thing I've started doing in fairly recent history, I would say in the last few months, and it works beautifully. I don't set down miniatures as much as I can help avoiding it, I will let whatever the last combat is, that scene just sits out in front of us. And I don't set down the next set until I call for initiative rolls. Because we roll initiative. We don't use Shadowdark initiative. I'm sorry. You still would make the roll, though.
Yeah.
Like, there's still a roll. Because prior to that, and why this matters for that representation and such, is it's all description. It's still all theater of the mind until the point that I go, and now we're moving into combat. The other thing is, and I don't remember where I heard this, somebody on a Insta-U grab YouTube, I think it's called YouTube, talked about that they set down miniatures and then their players attacked it. And they were like, that was like an NPC to talk to, but because they set down the miniatures, it was a cue to attack.
Yeah, so that was a Matt Colville video from a long time ago, I believe, that you're referencing. But I will try and find it and add it to the show notes.
My rollback on that is less so about like, oh, it told them to attack it. Is I want to stay in description mode and imagination mode as long as possible until we need that spatial representation and the cool pop of literally the example I gave at the top. I printed and painted up a Roper model that I think is super dope. And I finally got to use it literally years after painting it. And the players, when I plopped it down, because I didn't call it a Roper, I was like, oh, there's this sentient stalagmite and blah, 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 blah. And they were into it. And we have enough players who aren't steeped in D&D lore that they didn't know what it was. So when I plopped down this great big model with tentacles flailing around, they're like, whoa, that's crazy. And that's awesome. But they understood what the space looked like well before that model ever hit the table. It was just the final little embellishment to get it over the top. So that's one of my, like, how to be, if you're a miniature or, token or whatever user, man, hold putting those things out until the last possible moment to reveal them. Because again, it forces getting away from now that there's miniatures out, I don't have to be creative anymore because I'm counting squares.
Yeah, and I think it also speeds up play. I mean, I know that when, and you used to have miniatures out, and I used to do the same thing to a certain degree. Like we would move through the dungeon with miniatures, and that is, I mean, you want to talk about a crawl? That's a crawl. And here's the other thing: is that Shadowdark's crawling system works so well and moves so quickly that you don't need to represent it on the table. Because so much of what makes Shadowdark's system great for the purposes of dungeon crawling specifically is that it is easy to adjudicate in a way that can be done theater of the mind. And what makes Shadowdark's combat fun for you and I is that it becomes something else. It's not an extension of crawling rounds. It is a different mode of play. And both you and I really like combat, and our games tend to feature, quite a bit of combat, and your games especially tend to feature, combats that are largely not skippable, right? Like that's a feature of your style of play. So talk to me about, as far as like, talk to me about that arc. Is that the same thing that you were feeling? Was like were you feeling like pacing was an issue, or was there another reason why? Was it just an imagination, kind of modal thing?
Yeah, it's the second one. It wasn't pacing. I've gotten just like any GM thing, you kind of build your kit and you get your tools dialed in. And in the last, again, this is fairly recent, but in the last like 4 or 5 months, I've really got my miniature rig dialed in. So it's not about pacing so much. It was about wanting, especially because I was going into dungeons where I knew I was going to have to get out that stupid old mat and draw those ugly, ugly squares and not get to use my cool dungeon tiles. I'm just leaning into it now. Oh, no. But I knew I was going to have dungeons where I was going to have to do that and represent things that way. And I was like, man, it doesn't have the one-to-one fidelity is gone. Like there is no opportunity for that here without really, yes, I'm going to lay out a, 100 by 50 square wide room with doors and pillars and a furnace at one end. And at some point it becomes counterproductive.
Right.
And realized also in some play as a player with you of having moments where I was like really in the imagination space And it wasn't because of the miniatures. It was because it was just a cool, fun imagination space. And I think that's maybe, an important note is just like, you still want to play into that stuff. The nice thing is you can use the miniatures to kind of augment also. You drop a couple cool pieces in there, and then people are asking questions about a couple cool pieces. I want to ask you, because you moved, of the two of us, moved away from this sooner, literally close, near, far. And the near is the tricky one. How near is near?
Sure.
And your adjudication of that is different than mine. Yeah. So got miniatures out on a map or something. How near is near?
I don't really care.
There it is.
I'm so over. This is where like the basically, I mean, this is where I just lose interest nowadays. Like I'm tired. I've been beaten down, and
by players taking advantage of you.
No, not even that. I just look. I know that there are folks who like tactical combat in a way that like I like tactical combat. I like the tactics to be in a different, like my tactics are oriented in a different direction than other people's tactics, and I have a different way of liking it as a player and as a GM. I actually probably like it significantly different as a player than as a GM. It's a function of the groups I run for, etc. But what I have adopted this in the last couple weeks, what I call and I called it this in the last episode, just the kind of, it's almost like the loose wrist. Like it's about this is about where your spell's going to go. And
make an octopus with your hand and have it swim.
And just kind of like, this is about where your spell's going to go. And for me, the thing about movement in Shadowdark that I like is that it's a heuristic, and it's not an exacting thing. And the reason I like that is because we can move to what I think tends to be the fun stuff for the groups that I run for, which is the spectacle, which is things happening, which is people doing cool stuff. The fun for the groups that I run for doesn't tend to be the fact that I precisely adjudicated my move so that I was 5 feet further away than the goblin can get to me. What tends to be fun is dynamism and things happening and kinetic energy in combat. And that's just the way I like to run, and so I moved away from it. You've moved away from it too.
Not as much, but yes.
Yeah, you certainly aren't as flippant as I am. And I will say this. I like that as a player to a degree. And I don't know how to square that circle that I might be shortchanging players like you who maybe like that as a player. But as a GM, when I'm running, I hope I'm not shortchanging any players that like that. I don't think I am. But as a player, I like it. I like exacting movement more than I do as a GM. So
consistency. Well, consistency is key, right? That when you're GMing, you approach it relatively consistently. I know when I'm playing your game, if I'm like, oh man, that's more than 6 inches away or 6 squares. I know if I'm playing and you're GMing, I can just go, Matt will let me make it because it'll be much cooler here to make it than go, oh, you were 1 square short, you were 1 inch short. Too bad. And that's where I'm like the same. I if it's close, it's close enough. If it's near enough, I guess would be more accurate in this instance. If it's far, well, it's far. If it's 100-foot room and you are just entering and you're like, can I charge the guy on the other end? No, that's more than, that's clearly too far. Right. And I think that's where the difference is I will still go, no. And if it's iffy, I'll go, you can roll for it or no. Right. And, that's just, again, a different in GMing style.
I mean, just, I'm not going to let the things that are unrealistic or that's what I like is that miniatures allow for a sense of shared imagination and shared context so that we can all look at the map and go, that just looks too far.
Yeah, and shared accountability for what feels fun and seems reasonable and would be cool. And buried in this conversation is the most common, how do I play Shadowdark with miniatures question. Has to do with torches. And this is where you and I are going to be equally flippant.
Yeah,
no, it's probably better for me to jump on this grenade now. So people will say, in my aforementioned, it's a 50-foot wide, 100-foot long room. There are huge pillars extending from the floor to the sky. On the far end of the room is a dais with a small flickering light. This is literally a room in Forge of Fury that I'm describing. There are doors flanking each side, and behind the throne you can see just the faint outline of a dwarven face emblazoned on a door behind the throne. Well, wait a minute, Jody. The room's 100 feet long. They just entered with their torch. They can't see that. Yeah, that sucks. That's a cool room. Why are you shortchanging the description in order to maintain a 30-foot torch? And I get it. Online, there's some tools that allow you to do this, and I think that's neat, and I would have fun with it. It also becomes pacing killer. It's incredibly tedious to describe half a room and then just stop and describe the other half of the room. If you stay in description longer, you can get away with that. This is a trick I use in my GMing all the time, is like, and out and ahead, the torchlight ends and you're not sure what lies beyond. Prompt players to walk to darkness.
Sure.
Cautiously or not. Just if it's a room, if you are playing classic dungeon crawls, just tell people what's in the room. Unless for some reason there is something deeply satisfying or fun about the room being obscured by darkness, just give them the dimensions of the room.
Yeah.
And I literally did what I just did. There is a faint campfire of embers at the far end of the room, giving you a sense of this very distant room, and you can see across it. Right. Here's the cool details. And also, I need to get these models down. I can't lay out half a room and then lay out the other half of the room as you move forward, grid by grid. What are you gaining? I guess that would be my argument to people but I want it to have that fidelity. I think that's neat. And I've seen some really creative knitting hoop solutions and some really cool stuff that's been tried to create the fog of war, the Shadowdark, and the bubble of light. I don't know if that juice is worth that squeeze, man. I just don't think you're gaining enough to make all of that fiddling and jockeying worth it. And you can still have it as long as you stay in description mode. You don't need the bubble of light until combat comes in. And then I don't know if it's worth it then, because what ends up happening is you end up kind of hamstringing a handful of class types.
So I actually tend to be a little bit more stringent with light than you do in this way. I don't know. I don't know that it ends up. I think it all comes out in the wash. Mm-hmm. However, what I have found is that here's where I get frustrated. I get frustrated when I have to combine an oddly shaped room with an inability or with a limitations of light. So if a room is larger than a near size, whatever you want to quantify that as, if you want to use 30 feet, whatever, then that's fine. I'm happy to say, you need to step into the room and explore the room in order for me to describe it. However, if the room is also oddly shaped, it drives me bananas because we immediately interrupt the flow of the game and the flow of my description, and everybody's imaginations are now ripped from the scene, and this trapezoidal room or this room that has an L shape, now I have to represent it in miniature form because I am now segmenting it out, and I know I have players who are going to forget and be like, wait, I thought it was like that we were in the bottom of the L. It's like, oh no, you're on the side of the L. It's like, I have had too many situations where I have, with a level of fidelity that I knew I needed, described as accurately as I possibly could, and using all of my various teacher skills and even drawing it on the board. And what happens is either one of two things. If I draw it, then my PCs will 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot explore the room slowly but surely. Okay. And, maybe some groups can move past that. That's number one. Number two, the thing that happens is they will start to explore the room, and I will forget to tell them more about the room because I'm describing what they're seeing. What I have found, Jody, is, and I don't know if you found this as well, is that, sure, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I want to challenge my players with light. I want to do it. Oftentimes, when I am trying to do that, I sacrifice other elements of my GMing. Perhaps I'm not good enough at it. Perhaps I don't know. But I find myself falling short in other areas that I end up, I don't know, I just end up feeling like they're more important. It is more important for me to get to the point where players can interact with the room than it is to ensure that I challenge them maximally on light. Is that how you feel?
I think so. I just don't know where I've ever partially lit a room, which would be accurate per imagination. You've walked into this massive chamber, your torchlight extends. This is literally how I usually describe rooms as I go, and your torchlight extends to reveal and then stopped that description in a way that benefited my players' enjoyment of the game or the tactical challenge they faced. The only way I could think of that being valid is if there was something lurking on the far side of the room specifically waiting for them. Right. That was going to emerge out of the darkness. Guess what? You can narrate to that point. And that's where I've really just latched onto this thing of hold to narration as long as you can. Use the light to build suspense. Don't use the light for the tactical component of miniatures. I think that's the punchline on a lot of this is what's the upside to using miniatures? It allows for an amount of tactical thought that is very, very difficult in a theater of the mind game. It just, if you're in pure theater of the mind, how much tactical interest can you generate is pretty limited. And those spatial relationships fall apart very quickly because if you're the GM and you have 4 players, there are 5 different battles unfolding. The battle that your wizard is facing is different than the battle that your fighter is facing, is different than the battle than your thief is facing. Yeah. And the only way for all of them to see that same battle is to let them see it. And so obfuscating with light, as we were just talking about, I don't know. I just don't see the benefit. And like, I wish I had more answers. This is a few minutes ago, you said, I don't care. Every time I see somebody go, but how do you adjudicate shadows and the torchlight when you're using miniatures? I don't care. I just don't. I just don't. Yeah. And I can get so much more out of torchlight than just in a combat scene.
Yeah. So I feel pretty hypocritical in this moment because, we're trying to create an objective kind of scene. And then one of the core elements of Shadowdark is light, and we're hand waving it. And I do feel a sense of like hypocrisy there, right? Like I do. Maybe you are an elevated being who does not.
I am. It's thank you. It's nice to get credit for it once in a while.
But I genuinely feel like I try, and what I run up against is I think the thing that a lot of people run up against when they deal with torchlight, which is there's oftentimes, for the most part, you can make it work. In a hallway, the hallway ends in darkness but continues on. Great, easy. In a room that's 30 feet approximately, that's near-sized, the light illuminates the room. A large room that is easy to describe and doesn't have a whole lot of complex and difficult to imagine components, also fairly easy to do. For instance, a room with a monster on the other side, where that's kind of the point of the room, and maybe there's some bric-a-brac and whatnot around. Easy to describe and easy to use. The kind of unfolding light spills in, but not into the entire room. I just find that there's almost always a room where I look at it and I read it, and then I get to it at the table and I remember it and I go, oh, this is going to be such a pain in the butt. And that's where I end up.
when I run into those rooms, and again, this is filthy GM who preps and plans and sets scenes, and one of my players
doesn't care about light.
It doesn't care about light.
Running Shadowdark.
I'm not. I'm just whatever. It's just vibes, man. One of my players, it was funny. This weekend, I pulled out my drawn on map because I had this huge room, and I was like, I'm not laying out tiles for that. And they were like, well, it's almost like you knew we were going to go there. And I was like, yeah, because the dungeon's linear at this point. It's the hub, and yes, I knew you were going to go there. So flop, here's the map. And they were just giving me a hard time. The point I'm making is when you have those rooms, I will plan ahead for those. I will build dungeon tiles. If it's a really weird shaped room, I will figure out how, and I'll build parts of the room. That is a way to do it. There's limits, but if I have a particularly huge and weird shaped room, I will build chunks of the room with my warlock tiles. That's the tiles you and I both use. Another link for Matt to put in the notes. So we use the WizKids Warlock tiles, and I'll pre-build a few sections that I can lay down as they enter. If for some reason I know I can't just show them the whole room at once. So there is an amount of prep you can do. If you are, as Matt does, largely sandboxing it, and you're sandboxing a dungeon that's developing as you walk through it, which is a very niche group of folks. Yeah. I mean,
I did kind of once.
Yeah, you have. And if I guess that's the punchline. If you see those weird rooms, have a plan for how you want to attack those. I think the thing for most folks, again, just to really belabor this point, is just don't worry about it. You can still, and hold on to your description longer in those rooms to play with the light. But there are so many benefits to running with miniatures. And we haven't even got into the arts and crafts side of it. That is a joy. Add us if you want us to do that episode. That'll confuse Matt. I
know. I have to ask you about color wheelers.
Yeah, you will. But
triads.
There's somewhere there's a place to start in all of this. And I think if the spectacle and the art and all of that is something you're into, you could do a lot worse than going and picking up a few packs of minis and letting your players be impressed. Look at the Stranger Things kids and how stoked they were for one little pewter Demogorgon.
Well, all right, Jody. So I think we'll probably have I want to actually return to the how to start, but let's handle that in our takeaways. So we'll have maybe an extended takeaways segment, but let's hear from a sponsor, and we'll come back and we'll talk about how to get started and some of the things that we were taken away from this episode after we hear from our sponsor. This episode of Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Upright Torch, the potion that helps heroes rise to the occasion. Look, adventuring life can be hard, but sometimes not hard enough. Whether it's the weight of your armor or the fatigue of another long dungeon crawl, even the bravest champions can find their flame flickering. That's where Upright Torch comes in. Brewed by the finest alchemists in the realm, Upright Torch is a discreet herbal tonic designed to restore vitality and improve stamina, and help your inner flame burn bright once more. No runes, rituals, or embarrassing quests are required. Just one simple little draft, and you'll be back wielding your weapon with confidence. Right now, listeners can get 15% off their first order by using code Dungeon Master Diaries at checkout. Because when the torches dim and the moment comes, make sure yours stands tall. Upright Torch, light the night. All right, Jody, let's bring this topic into the light, or it was always in the light because we apparently don't care. Oh God,
I care. I just don't care one tiny little spot in the whole dang game.
All right, what are your core takeaways, or what's at least your first one?
My first one, you left us off with where do you get started?
Yeah, I want to hear about this.
If it were me, and tomorrow all of my miniatures disappeared, and then I was sad for years, and then decided I would love again, I would actually probably not start with miniatures. Kelsey has a couple of videos about her DM kit, and she talks about that she really likes flat pack minis or flat miniatures, the acrylic, and then there's printed art on both sides. Man, that stuff's so good now. And the bang for your buck, you could do worse. If you are interested in dabbling in the benefits we talked about and some more representation, but you don't have miniatures and you're light on storage, or you're a traveling GM, or that's where I would start. Is if you want to start buying miniatures, well, then go buy miniatures. I am a huge proponent. I love Reaper miniatures. I think they're great. But man, if you just want to get stuff down on the table and you're not interested in the whole hobby side of it, flat pack miniatures of any sort, Skinny Minis, Arknight miniatures from Arknight Games, great stuff there. Go check it out. It's a great way to get the benefit without the headache.
So I'm going to encourage folks, anyone who's interested in using miniatures, I'm going to just encourage folks, if you're buying, gray miniatures, you're buying them unpainted, I'm going to encourage folks to if you're interested in starting a new hobby, which this is, paint them. And Jody, you're the one who got me into this, and I am eternally grateful, because I did not consider myself to be an artist and really artistic in almost any way. And for whatever reason, miniatures was an on-ramp into feeling more confident as an artistic person. I mean, I'm colorblind, and so that presents a whole bunch of funny and somewhat, self-conscious feelings about being able to use color and just feel confident in my abilities in that sense. But it was a fun and interesting foray into art, into color, and into kind of overcoming some of my own self-consciousness about art. I know a lot of people share that. So I want to encourage folks who have never painted a miniature before that, start with just the hero miniatures. And if you're playing with a group of, 4 people, that's only 4. And that's awesome. And then buy some flat packs for the monsters. And that makes the heroes cool. And it is amazing to me when you bust out a painted miniature, how people react to it in a way that I would not expect them to. And when you have painted a miniature for a player and it's their character, who I know in Shadowdark, they're going to die in 45 seconds. I understand. But it's a sign of, and it's a gesture that has always, I think, served you and I really well. So I know that was a bit longer than maybe our usual takeaway segments are, but I just felt like it was really important to kind of plug those 3-dimensional miniatures. If you're interested in them, get some paint on them. There's lots of videos. We'll put some links in the show notes to good places to start.
Yeah, I mean, is the juice worth the squeeze is my last takeaway. So you're going to buy all these miniatures, you're going to store all this stuff, you're going to put them all down. If you love the miniature hobby, yes, it is. If you enjoy those little representations of fantasy critters, it just is so fun. The amount of time I will spend in right now, our game room at Matt's place, where he has some terrain beautifully displayed, and I just will space out and stare at it and think about the possibilities, or as we like to call it in other places, decant my miniatures, which is pull them out of their foam cases and just look through what I have. I have a display case in my office. I love that hobby so much. And the fact that I get to blend that love of miniatures and painting and all that stuff with this wonderful imagination space game with my friends, it is a lifelong pursuit that I'm excited to see what's next from. So for me, it's absolutely worth it. If painting makes you break out in hives, if the notion of having to draw a map gives you cold sweats, don't do it, man. Don't do it.
Yeah, and so I'm going to end on kind of an earnest note as well. During this episode, I have in a number of places felt like we were sort of contradicting ourselves. We care about distances. We don't care about distances. We care about light. We don't care about light. And I think that miniatures are a study in so many of the things we do in the hobby, which is it's a very idiosyncratic hobby, role-playing games. And we try and be extremely clear that we aren't one true way-ism people. And hopefully this episode folks got something out of it, even if they're not interested in miniatures. But I just want to end with the fact that, like, we all contain multitudes, and, you know, we contradict ourselves, and as GMs, we're all just humans. And so just embrace what makes you happy. And you know what? Like, for you and I, seeing our player characters and monsters and stuff represented on the table in miniature, it just, like, evokes, like, a childlike sense of wonder, and it's like, it's awesome, and we're not going to apologize for it.
No, we're not. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful or maybe enjoyable in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can share your experiences with us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. There might just be pictures of our miniatures there. You can find links to those feeds or any other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, give your inner child a little hug, man.
Dungeon Master Diaries production, the Stingbat Radio Network, is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Intro and outro music is composed by Kirsten Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library, copyright 2023.